Am I good? I'm on?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, hello. Welcome to Jefferson Patterson's Lunchtime Learning. I'm Nate Salzman. I'm one of the education programmers over here. And today we are going to learn how to make pottery. We're going to learn how to make pots sort of similar to these two right here. We're going to be learning a little bit about Native American pottery. So if you have any Play-Doh, any clay, any dirt, feel free to grab it right now and you can join along and follow along. If not, feel free to put this on while you make a sandwich and just listen, because we are going to make some pots today and maybe do a little bit of a Bob Ross sort of vibe. All right, so now I'm going to head over to my workshop, very far away. Workshop. And before I forget, I have the awesome Miss Lindsay helping me out today with the camera and whatnot, because she knows that I'm a little bit uncomputer savvy. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some clay. This is clay that I dug up not far from here. And I'm going to grab a small chunk, a piece about a little bit smaller than your palm maybe. And then I'm just going to start rolling it up into a ball. And I'm just going to roll it up into a ball and make it nice and even and circular. And the first style of pot that we're going to work on is what's called a pinch pot. If any of you guys can remember from...
Do you need your iPad?
Do I need my iPad? No, I think I should be all right. I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. So I've got my ball of clay. I'm rolling it up. And now I'm just going to take my thumb. I'm going to actually push it into the center of my clay. I'm going to make a hat for my thumb. For those of you who are adults, I'm going to warn you now, I usually deal with children, so a lot of my things are going to sound silly. So then, once I have my thumb hole in there, I'm going to take my middle finger and I'm just going to pinch. I'm going to start at the very bottom of my clay and pinch and scoot over a little bit and pinch and scoot over a little bit. I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep going until I make a happy little pot. And as you can see, every time I'm pinching my material, I'm making my hole a little bit bigger. So now my thumb definitely fits inside of it. And I'm making my walls a little bit thinner. And I'm just going to keep sort of going around at the bottom and try to even it out. So any spots that are sticking up that seem a little bit proud, I'm just going to try and get a nice even thickness all the way through. And as I do this, I'm going to move closer and closer to the edge of my pot. I'm just going to keep going. And here's the secret of this pottery. I never really know exactly what I'm going to make until it's made. This way, whatever I make, it's exactly the way I intended it to. So right now I've got a nice little pot. I can go through and I can make this a little bit cleaner by just sort of gently taking my fingers and smearing across the top of it and cleaning it up. Is there a way to actually see if there's comments? Oh, they'll pop up? Okay. So just to let you guys know, they generally don't let me play with technology. Dirt is about as complex as I get, so this is a big deal for me to be on this. So right now I'm smoothing out my pot, and let's say that I look at my pot and I say, you know what? I think it's a little too low, and I want to raise these edges up. Then all I would do is I just take my edges and I'm going to squish them together. So I'm going to grab on both sides. I'm going to give them a little push together and then turn over and push and turn. And as I'm pushing, what I'm really doing is I'm taking the rim of my pot and I'm making it a little bit smaller. So now I went from a pot that was really wide to a pot that's a little bit narrower. And maybe you've decided that your pot, you like it wide. That's perfectly fine too. So now my pot is a little bit narrower, and now I'm just going to pinch again a little bit to make it bigger. So pinch pots are one of those things that we learn as little kids, and they're an incredibly useful skill. You can actually make some very nice pots just by using this exact technique. So I've got my little tiny dinky pot. Now let's say that I want to make it a bit bigger. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take some more clay, and this time instead of rolling it up into a ball, I'm just going to roll it into a snake. And you'll notice my hands are actually tilted oh so slightly. And this way, I can get a nice even piece of clay coming out. And I'm trying for something a little bit thicker than a pencil, but not too much thicker. If you have a nice table that you can work on, you can use that to help you out. If I don't mess up the table too much and make this go out of focus. And then once I have my piece of clay, I'm going to actually attach it. So the way that I attach it is I'm just going to simply start off by just pressing it on. And I like to sort of press it all the way around before I start attaching it too well. For those of you out there who paid attention in your art classes, you'll be familiar with this. This is called a coil pot. So I can take my pinch pot and add coils to it and turn it into a coil pot. So now that I've got my coil all the way around, it's attached, but it's very gently attached. So you can see there's still some gaps in there. It's not very well attached. So I'm going to take my middle finger and my thumb, and I'm going to do sort of a rolling motion like this. What this is going to do is it's going to take my thumb and it's going to smear down the outside. And then on the inside, I'm going to do the exact same motion, but I'm going to flip it. So I'm going to actually pull and smear upwards. And this is going to help to bond those two pieces together. And it's going to make the top of my pot look a little ugly and a little gnarly at first, and that's okay. Right now, what I'm interested in is making sure that these two pieces are well connected. Now, an interesting fact is this is actually one of the things that Native Americans would do. They would do this exact same thing of pinching their coils together. And every now and again, they would do that, and they would sometimes run into problems. One of the big problems they would run into is things breaking. So right here, I have a picture of a piece of a pot, and if you look, you can see this nice smooth edge right there. That's actually where there was a coil. So somebody wasn't doing a good enough job of connecting their coils 400 or 500 years ago, and as a result, their pot broke right along that coil line. So that's good for archaeologists, because that lets us know how they were building their pots, but it's not too good for them. So I got one coil on there. My pot's a little bit bigger. I think I'm going to add another coil. So same thing. I've got my clay. I'm just going to roll it out. Right there, I've got my thin side, and right here I got my fat side, so I'm just going to focus on this a little bit. One of the great things about pottery is it's not an exact science. So if I've got a spot that's a little thick, it's not the end of the world. I'm just trying to go for generally even. Sometimes when I get bored, or if I'm getting frustrated, I'll just roll out a bunch of coils, and then I'll take a break. Get all my coils ready, so this way then when I feel a little bit more inspired, I can really just start rocking and rolling. Oh, somebody says love Nate. I really hope that's my girlfriend. Okay, so I've got my pot. I'm just going to add another coil to it. I'm doing the exact same thing as before. Now this clay is clay that I dug up right here in Calvert County. And I didn't really do too much to it. One of the cool things about clay that you find that's wild, that's what it's sometimes called when you don't buy it from the store, wild clay, is that it has a lot of impurities in it. Now, these impurities do make for a little bit of trouble. So one of the big problems with wild clay is that it's got lots of, sometimes called temper or grit. Most of the time, it's usually just bits of sand, and that sand will actually make the clay harder to work. So I've got my new coil attached. Now I gotta smear them together. So it'll make it a lot harder to work. It'll make the clay sometimes a little harder to get to stick together. Sometimes it'll cause the clay to crack more easily. But it also has one really big advantage, which is that it actually makes it more resistant to fires. And when I say more resistant, what I really mean is if I were to take this pot right now and put it into a fire, there's a lot of water in here, and that water would actually expand and turn into steam. And when it expands, it'll actually explode. I can tell you from personal experience, there is nothing more upsetting than working on a pot. You spend hours and hours building it, you put it into the fire, you think you got it dried out enough, and then all of a sudden you hear poof, and you watch as big old chunks of pottery come flying out of the fire. So one of the ways that you can avoid that is you can add grit to it or temper. Things like sand or oyster shell, and those little tiny chunks of sand or oyster shell basically create little pockets that allow the moisture to escape out of the clay. Now, if you don't do that, sometimes you're lucky and your pot will still survive, but you'll get what's called spalling. So, right here is an example of spalling. Oop. Could you do me a favor? Could you pass me that smaller pot right over there? Thank you so much. Spalling is when you have that steam trying to escape and you didn't add enough grit or temper, and so as a result, a chunk of it comes flying off. So right here we have a piece of shell-tempered pottery. We can see all the little bits of shell in there, and we can see this giant chunk that's popped off. That is troublesome. That means this pot is not very useful. Looks very nice, though. So temper is a really important part, and even though it makes making the pot a little more difficult, it means that our pot is more likely to survive the firing process because it's allowing the moisture to come out more easily. Hey, Marlene, how are you doing? So right now I'm making my pot, and you can see it's getting a little bit bigger. And I can just sort of keep going with this as much as I want. Now, when archaeologists find pots, they generally don't find those nice big pots like you saw earlier. They're usually finding little tiny pieces of pottery. And sometimes it can get really difficult to figure out what's going on. This, for example, is an actual artifact. This is a piece of stone-tempered pottery. And I'm going to tell you right now, if I found that, I would probably just keep walking by. I would not know what I was looking at. So archaeologists, they'll actually look at a stone, and they're going to look at it very carefully, and they're going to look for a couple different things. And those things are not just going to tell them that it's pottery, but it's also going to tell them what the pot is made out of, which then helps them to figure out the age. So, for example, if they found a piece of pottery like this right here, with all these little lines in there and patterns, that would help them to figure out what kind of pottery it was. Different style pots were popular in different times. This piece right here is an example of a Towson pot. I have it written on the back. I'm not that skilled. I can't remember things. And it's from about 900 to 1600 BC. So that's a pretty old piece of pottery. However, sometimes the pots aren't nearly as fancy as that. Sometimes the pots just look like little pieces of rock like this. So archaeologists, they have a special tool that helps them to figure out if it's actually pottery. And this is my favorite fact. Archaeologists will actually lick it. Yeah, that's right. They actually will take the piece of pottery that they think might be a pot, and they lick it. And because there's all that temper in there, it makes it really porous, and which means that oh, there we go. Sorry. I think we lost you there for a second. So as I'm doing this and making my coils, I'm now starting to think about what shape and what kind of pattern I want. So I'm starting to get some height. And one of the cool things about doing this for fun is I don't necessarily have to follow a Native American style pot. Now, if I did want to follow that, though, I could go to Jefferson Patterson Park's diagnostic page, which has some awesome pictures of all different pots. And I could try and copy one of those. Or I can just use, is this better? Somebody said blurry image. Can you see it now? Hope you can see it. If not, keep complaining and I'll fix it, I promise. Sorry, commenting. Perfect. So yeah, right now I'm just smoothing this out. Are you okay, Lindsay? Did you hurt yourself? Now I've got a nice little pot. Something this size would be perfect for all sorts of things. I could use this, for example, for holding something really valuable, maybe that I only have a limited amount of. So for Native Americans, that might be something like tallow or deer fat or bear fat. something which might be liquid if it gets warm out, but I wouldn't have huge amounts of it. Something this size would also be great, though, for holding my change. One of the things you'll also notice is that my pot has a round bottom. This round bottom comes in handy for a couple of reasons. Oh, by the way, hey Baron, how are you doing? So this round bottom comes in handy for a couple of reasons. One, it means that if I was using this for cooking in a fire, I could just simply take it and bury it in the ashes and it would sit straight up. And another reason is by not having a flat edge, there's actually less of a chance of my pot breaking during the firing process. So by keeping that round edge, I'm basically making a stronger shape, sort of like an arch. So as I'm spreading this out, I'm noticing that the top of my pot is getting real wide, and I want to bring that back in. So now, instead of doing that pinching motion like I did before, I'm going to actually take my hands and hold it all the way around the whole piece. I'm just going to give it just a little squish, and you're going to actually see, you can see my fingers, the tips of my fingers just moving in just a little bit. And the squishing motion, I'm not doing a whole lot, but just by going around little by little, I'm making a very big change. So, one of the cool things about clay is what is called a plastic material. And not plastic as in the plastic we're thinking of, but plastic as in it's something that you can bend and fold and maneuver and mold around. And clay actually has water in two different ways. Clay has water intermolecularly, meaning that in between the clay molecules there's water, and that's actually what makes it flexible. But clay also has water intramolecularly, meaning that within the clay molecule, there's actually water chemically bound to it. And that water is very, very, very well bound. In fact, the only way that you can get rid of that water is with heat. So you actually have to heat the clay up about 900 degrees Celsius. And when you do that, you'll actually be able to take that water and remove it from the pot. And once you remove that water from the pot, it cannot come back. And that's actually what hardens the clay into something we use for cooking, or for making mugs, or for using for all different kinds of other things. So right now I'm doing the exact same thing as before. I'm just sort of moving my edge in a little bit and making my bowl a little bit taller. I'm sort of liking the way it looks. I think it looks pretty good so far. Might be a little oblong here or there, but that's okay. Sometimes you can just sort of tap it in. Now, one of the things that Native Americans would do, could you pass me those two things right there? One of the things that Native Americans would do to shape their pots and to also add patterns is they would use two very specific tools. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I just want to say thank you again to Miss Lindsay. She's been such a big help passing me things because I am so forgetful. I think things are close, and then I realize that I'd have to run around the table to grab them. So I could use two things to add patterns. I could use a little tiny stick like this and just draw in my patterns. And since I'm not going for a specific shape, I could do whatever pattern I want. Or the other tool I could use, and you'll see this a lot in Native American pottery, is I could use a paddle. And that paddling could be something like this right here. This is actually a paddle with some string on it. This is called a cordage-wrapped paddle. And that cordage actually shows up on pots. So if you look carefully at this pot, if you look, you can see all these little lines in there. And those lines are actually from cordage marks. So somebody took this paddle and just tapped the outside and left that patterning. So using this paddle, it does a couple things. One, it helps to thin out my pot. Two, it makes for a cool pattern. And three, it actually helps to compact the clay a little bit, making it a bit more sturdy. So if I had any issues with cracks that I couldn't necessarily see, it's going to actually help to get rid of them. Now I'm just going to use this to help sort of even out my pot a little bit. And if you don't have one of these, you could also still just use your fingers and just tap the outside. And that's going to have the same effect of helping compress everything. So, fun fact, the first time that I tried making a pot, I watched a a man by the name of Keith Grenoble, who is an amazing potter. Quick shout out to him. And Keith made this beautiful pot in 30 seconds. He was literally just showing how to make a pot, and he just made this giant monster pot. And he made it look so easy. I spent about 4 hours trying to make a pot that was half as good as his. So this is a skill that does take some time. But one of the cool things about it are I can literally go out by a stream and just dig up some of the material. And I could just sit there and fool around with it. And if I like what I got, I can take it home. And if I don't like it and I get really upset, I can throw it in the water and nobody will be any of the wiser. So I've got a pretty good shape right now. So I might want to start smoothing out the outside. And if my clay is really wet, I can just do that with my bare hands. If not, I can take a little water and just rub it on the outside. One of the big mistakes that people make with pottery is they tend to add too much water. You can see I'm not using much water, and I'm just trying to get the outside a little bit smoothed out. Now, if I wanted to fire this pot, I would have to go through and do a couple of different things. The first thing that I would do is I would make sure that this pot is completely dried. The drier my pot is, the less likelihood I have of steam being inside of this pot or water in this pot expanding into steam and causing it to explode. So I would make sure that I got this pot really dried. If I wanted to cheat a little bit, I would actually take the pot and put it in an oven at about 200 degrees and let it sit there and really just push out any of the moisture. And then I would start a fire. And I mean a real big honking, screaming fire. And I would put my pot next to that fire and let it dry out nearby and make sure there's no moisture. And then when the pot got so hot that I couldn't touch it, with a pair of good thick gloves, I would actually push it into the bed of coals and then build a giant fire around it. And the goal of that fire is not just to heat it up, but to also insulate it. I want that fire to make sure that there's no air, cold air that's going to come in and hit it, and to make sure that there be a good bed of ashes to help keep it safe. So here's my pot so far, looking pretty good. And I'd say that this is actually just about right for a good cup of coffee, so I'm not going to complain. I can go through and I can clean up the rim a little bit. If it's really bothering me, I can take a stick and just sort of scrape off a little bit to try and get a little more even. And I'm sorry, I keep scooting this thing out of camera view. So I think this is just about the end of our demonstration. If you guys make an awesome looking pot, please make sure to post it up online and send us a picture. We would love to see it. Also, our next Friday, we're going to be doing another lunchtime learning, and Miss Deborah is going to be running that one, and she has something that I'm super excited for. She's going to be showing a colonial game, and I think she's even going to include all the stuff that you need to play it online. So if you guys want to learn how to play an awesome colonial game and try it out yourself, go for it. In the meantime, please stay safe, but also stay active. Thank you so much, and have a good day.